Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to view our class that we're offering here. And I'd like to explore information about Mary Magdalene and why is her rising presence important to us in this day and age. I have felt like in our modern world, our 3D world, we may be losing touch with that which is sacred. So, how do we weave and navigate the sacred into the structure of the modern world? Or have we lost access to the sacred? And what is this lost knowledge costing us? And why were such lengths taken to suppress the divine feminine in the first place? So, these are some of the things that we're going to explore. I'm Christy Michaels, and I'm a priestess of Mary Magdalene. And I call my business the Magdalene Impact because when I began to learn about her gospel and what she was all about, it had such a tremendous impact on my life that I decided to do that. And I was so curious about this that I wanted to put together a seminar that would address some of the things about what has been suppressed and why do we want to discover what has been suppressed and what steps Magdalene takes to become one of the most famous awakened women, and how does this help us? So these are some of the things that I'm really dedicated to exploring with you. And I've asked Elizabeth Kelley to come today to talk about her experience with being awakened to the Magdalene. So here is Elizabeth. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm so grateful to you because it's brought so much value to my life, and it has touched me in such a really powerful way. More than anything else that I could say of in my life. So would you like to talk a little bit about it, or I can introduce you more formally? Let's see. Let me do that first. So, Priestess Elizabeth Kelley of the Holy Order of Mary Magdalene is a teacher and a scholar and a dancer, an event producer and a lover of the divine feminine. She was formerly educated in comparative religions at Temple University, California Institute of Integral Studies, and UC Berkeley, and she has committed over 30 years to in-depth study and practice to both Eastern and Western mystery school traditions. A mystical encounter with Mary Magdalene in 1989 profoundly changed her life and brought her onto the path of research and travel and discovery of Mary of Magdala, the traditions of the Black Madonna, the quest for the Holy Grail, Gnosticism, and mystic Christianity. To understand the importance and the evolution of Magdalene's life, she traveled extensively throughout France, England, Wales, Ireland, and Egypt, and Israel. Through the course of her journal, she's made several pilgrimages to Black Madonna sites and has been a member of China Gallen's Black Madonna Circle since 1991. In 1996, she was ordained a priestess in the Holy Order of Mary Magdalene by Bishop Rosamond Miller and empowered to celebrate the Gnostic Eucharist, a beautiful and deeply moving ceremony enacting sacred marriage of Christ and Sophia. As a priestess of Magdalene, she has taught and presented her work in conferences to colleges and seminars all around. So she has also started her own Lyceum of the Holy Sophia, of which I was ordained in. And it was such a powerful, uplifting time in my life. And everything changed for me. And it's just impacted me in such a great way. And I'm so deeply grateful. So, Elizabeth, what do you have to say for yourself?
thank you, Christy, for that long introduction. Um, yeah, it's been just an absolutely amazing experience that I had. Um, I had no idea. My rational mind, it never it could never have conceived the life that I had. And becoming an ordained priestess in multiple traditions and a hierophant and ordaining others was not something that came out of my rational mind. It's something that just, I mean, came to me. And it started with this very profound calling by Marie Magdalena to help represent her or represent her into the modern era. And then one thing after another, I mean, it all happened so fast. It was so overwhelming at first. It just, as you would say, blew my mind.
Yeah.
It was like, what just happened? And then the death of my mother, and being in a Russian Orthodox church with this big coat and a babushka, and hanging out with these Russian Orthodox monks, with the long robes and the long beard and long hair, the big belts, and just, I mean, living at a Russian Orthodox monastery, it was way off the charts of what I had in my destiny. I was living in Marin, I was an event producer, I was having a very different life, and now I'm in this Russian Orthodox monastery. Yeah.
One an Orthodox monastery that's devoted to Magdalene too, right?
Not necessarily. No, it was
No.
called Holy Trinity. It wasn't devoted to Magdalene. I just happened to arrive there on the day that they had published a book on Mary Magdalene,
Mm.
and Mary Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles. So I think I told this story in an earlier, um, in one of your earlier videos, but my mother died. I'm from upstate New York. I went to Syracuse. I went with a former boyfriend who, became a reoccurring boyfriend over the years. But at that point, he was a former boyfriend. But he was willing, because he met my mother, and he was just he was a mensch, a really good, solid, supportive person. And he came with me back to Syracuse. And he went through the whole process, choosing the coffin. Oh my God, that's difficult. And, everything that you got to do when one of your parents die. So he was there with me, and he went through the cremation with me, which was a big freaking deal. Not only the memorial service, but he sat with me through my mother's cremation and through the whole process. And then the next day I took him to the Syracuse airport. And while we were in the airport, there was these guys with long hair to their waist and, long beards and, looking very Russian, almost Rasputin-like, in their garb. And we're like chatting it up. And their father had just died. Their mother was on the same plane as Scott was back to San Francisco. So we had time to chat before the plane left. And they insisted that I come as their guest to their monastery, which is in Utica. And for anyone who knows upstate New York, Utica is not far from Syracuse. I'm guesstimating 50, 60 miles, not far. And they were south of Utica. And so they had a big monastery. It was considered one of the biggest monasteries outside of the Soviet Union. This is 1989. This is before, all the big fall of the Soviet Union. And this is when they had a lot of restrictions. So they had these icons, and it was one of the best, considered the best preserved icons almost in the United States, and they had a press. In those days, we printed books on a printing press,
Mhm.
and they had just published a book on Mary Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles. And I arrived looking for the monk who invited me, who was, pretty close to my age. So there was a lot of familiarity, he and his brother. And there was this simpatico. And we, of course, experienced the death of a parent at exactly the same time. So they were very welcoming to me. And I was given a room, they called it a cell, and I was given an icon of Mary Magdalene and a book on Mary Magdalene, and they put me in this cell. And the cell was like, well, I don't know, measurements. It could have been, 8 feet by 6 feet, like small, enough for a single bed. And there was a sink in there and a toilet down the hall and a little dresser, and there was and some red eggs. So there was this this dresser where I had the icon of Mary Magdalene and this book, The Apostle to the Apostles. And I'm in this cell and it's freaking cold. It's Russian Orthodox Easter, but upstate New York, there's still like, 2 feet of snow and snowing outside, and it was cold. Anyways, I'm in this room and kind of in shock. I mean, really in shock that all of this had happened.
Because
And
the apparition of Mary Magdalene had already appeared to you, right?
yeah, but that was shocking. And then, the death of my mother was shocking. And then it just continued to carry on. So I'm just talking about my opening to all this Mary Magdalene material. And if you didn't hear it or if you've never heard it, it came through um, both an apparition experience and then uh, being the death of my mother and then being at a Russian Orthodox monastery. And it was called Holy Trinity Monastery.
So that's more detailed than I've heard in the past. All those that details. Can you talk about the actual apparition itself and what that experience was like?
Well, I could, but it's kind of an intimate experience. It was just
The reason why I'm asking though is because we've really seen and witnessed a rise in Mary Magdalene, and that's what I'm mostly interested is you know like she knew she was going to be rising, and she was actually making an appeal to you, wasn't she, to support
was
her?
calling. I mean, yes, would you was an asking, politely asking, would you help represent me or represent me into the modern world because it was time for people now could more fully understand who I am, and it was a good time. And
Yeah.
then I mean it went on. There were certain things said. There were certain um, it was accompanied by a certain amount of experiences. And it
Right.
was a beautiful apparition. It was incredibly, softly feminine with a diaphanous opalescent color with, just a beautiful emanation. And that emanation went into me and it felt like I was absorbing this. And I, I mean, and I'm not going to go into all the intimate material, but on the other side of it, I was like bolted and, sitting up in bed and, like going, wow, what really happened? And, feeling that I would be able to have a different relationship to Christianity than I had, when I was a young girl and raised in Catholic schools, and that it would shift my perception of Christianity. And so I really sat with that uh, for a long time. And then, like in the morning, I got a call that my mother had died. And so that was a very let's say double whammy. Well, actually, it was not exactly the next morning. I have to say, I think now it was a couple of days later because this happened just prior to Easter, which in the Western calendar we celebrate. Sometimes we celebrate it exactly the same time as the Russian Orthodox, and sometimes it comes 2 weeks later. So it was in that first window that I had that experience just before our Easter. And then I went into Easter and having Easter, an experience of Easter through the eyes of Mary Magdalene. It was a different view of the whole, resurrection story, the whole crucifixion story. I was there having this experience through Mary Magdalene's eyes. And, I had all kinds of amazing perceptions. And then, on the other side of that, my mother died, and then it was, all that it takes to make the arrangements, go back to upstate New York, and, have the experiences I have already talked about with my dear friend Scott. And so, uh, yeah, is that what you wanted me to talk about?
Well, I like what you're saying in terms of the experience of your perception through Magdalene's eyes, because what unfolded in terms of my connection with you is I also received a vision that had to do with telling the story of Easter through Mary Magdalene's eyes. And we created the Magdalene Moonrise service, and we did that for 14 years. It'll be the 15th year this next year. But it was an interactive, direct experience where people got to know, they got to have Eucharist, and they got to really work with getting anointed and deepening their connection to the sacred, and seeing the dance and the beautiful music. I mean, it was quite profound experience. It was probably one of the greatest joys of my life, was doing the Magdalene Moonrise Easter services. And you were doing the Eucharist too. But
Mhm.
you met Rosamond at that time, or
Oh my God. I met Rosamond only a couple years after my Magdalene experience. So I met
uh,
Rosamond in 92, I think it was.
right?
So,
And that was a mystical experience connecting with her.
yes, that was a major experience. And in the bio you read, um, I actually was ordained by Rosamond in 94. And I think you read 96. So anyways, I was ordained by Rosamond in 1994, and then ordained by Lady Olivia. I was ordained through into the Fellowship of Isis in 1990, and then when Olivia came, has her first trip to outside of England, first trip to the United States or outside of Great Britain, uh, and she came to California. That was like 95 or 96. And so I was ordained by her into the Fellowship of Isis, which was really profound. And at that time, I was the first Magdalene priestess in the Fellowship of Isis. And now there's many, including yourself. But
Yeah.
in the beginning, I was the first. And um, when I was first ordained, I had just come back from Glastonbury, England, after this Magdalene pilgrimage. And it absolutely coincided with all horrible things. The first Gulf War, which was when Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait, and then, there all this bombing started. It was a challenging period.
We're still having bombing going on. It's like,
Wait,
when is the bombing going to end, please? It's like, oh my God. This is why I feel so much like Magdalene is, for me, the work is a sacred activism. It's it's raising the feminine voice of the sacred woman, and she doesn't want her babies killed. She doesn't want her sons killed. No war, and we still haven't learned that lesson. In fact, women, it's getting more and more destructive for women in our ability. We don't to become in sovereign, powerful, empowered priestesses. And I think the teaching is in the experience of Magdalene in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. So, so when and how did you get hooked up or connected to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene?
well, it's all part of the study of Gnosticism. I mean,
Well, I remember, Elizabeth, you gave me this book,
oh, great.
The Gospel of Mary Magdalene by Leloup, and I was totally in shock. It's like, what? She has her own gospel? And then I started to read it. And in the beginning of the book, the first part is the foreword by Jacob Needleman. I don't know if you've met Jacob Needleman or know him at all, but I did have a chance. He came to talk at the Court of Madeira Center for Spiritual Living one time. And then the preface is written by some people that I believe are friends of yours. Is that
Laura,
is
yeah, and her husband.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about who they are and how they're in Colorado? Is that right, David? David and Laura Lee.
Yeah, David Tresemere, Laura Leah Canyon. Um, they I knew Laura Leah from a time when I lived in Los Angeles, and my connection with Laura Leah goes back to the 79, like way back there. And she was married to somebody else. I'm not going to go into her personal history, but one thing led to another. She became interested in Mary Magdalene. This is, 20 years, 20 plus years later, she became interested in Mary Magdalene. And so at that point, I think she got married or is about to get married with, I think his name was David, but his last name is Tresemere.
Right.
And um, they created a community with this fabulous um, clubhouse called Star House. And it was in Colorado, outside of maybe Boulder, maybe not far from Aspen, up there in the mountains. And they both became very interested. And David had a friend. Oh God, I haven't thought of this in a long time, who was an astrologer, and that guy put him in touch with La Loupe in France. And David had a good amount of family money. He had a good amount of money. And off to France they went and they met La Loupe. And one thing led to another. He ended up doing the foreword to the book and
The preface to the book.
the preface.
Yeah.
So, and then they very nicely, well, she came out to California. She wanted to meet Rosamond. I took her to meet Rosamond. We had this long, like, 5 hours, 6 hours lunch that went on and on and on and to dinner. And we just talked and talked and talked. And then she wanted to become ordained as a priestess of Isis. She became very committed. She came back out. She took ordination in the very beginning when I was just beginning, having this Lyceum of the Holy Sophia. And she then went back and created this group. And then she brought me out, and I celebrated the Eucharist at Star House and had a wonderful experience in Colorado. They got a great place. So, and then they moved to New Zealand. So, I mean,
Oh,
I haven't really seen her. They're in New Zealand. What's the island off New Zealand? Tanzania? No. What's the island off New?
I don't
Anyway,
know.
they're way down there at the bottom of the earth.
But
And
before that, they had decided to work with or help Lulu to get an English translation. And did they know Joseph Rowe, or how did Lulu?
I'm sorry, I'm not current. I could have known it all of that at one time, but that's a
That's
lot.
why I'm trying to get all of this from you, because, this information is getting lost to us.
Well, anyways, I mean, me knowing them is, I mean, I'm grateful that I know them, but in the realm of things, it it's not important. What's important is they met La Loupe, and La Loupe made this translation of the Gospel of Mary, and they were able to do the foreword. They also wrote a play, and I went back out to Colorado for this play on Mary Magdalene that they had wrote and he had directed. So they got very creative. And then, oof, they went off to New Zealand, and it kind of cut into my friendship with them and with Laura Leah. I think she changed her name to Leah, but she was Laura Leah when I knew her.
Mhm.
And I don't really see them.
Right. So, but you've met Joseph Rowe, right?
Yeah, multiple times, sure.
Yeah.
And he's recently passed.
Yeah. Joseph, I was very touched when I went to hear him speak on one of his trips
They
out
were
here.
there together in Santa Rosa.
Yeah, yeah. And I took this book, and he saw how dog-eared it was. He was like,
Mhm.
"Whoa, you really been studying," because I was so taken by it, and wanting to do a deep dive. And that's what I'm looking forward to doing again, because there's something about it, and I explained it to him, my experience, that it's almost as if the ideas and the concepts that are laid out along with Lulu's commentary um, are really imbued with an energetic, like they raise your frequency, they raise your vibration. And so I found myself having more and more mystical experiences, and um, it just and so I wanted to go deeper into it. And so I asked him about that. What was that like for him when he was, and he said, well, I've translated the Gospel of Thomas, and this is a lot of what I do. And he's a very high level scholar and a classical musician and all that. And then he says to me, but you know what? The Gospel of Mary Magdalene woke me up. I thought that was so cool. And that's what I found for me too. It's like there's an awakening that happens because the information that's contained in it and how it's laid out, where you really get to experience what she went through in the soul's journey and whatnot. If you begin to understand it elevates the spirit, opens the heart, and goes into quite a journey. Anyway, we had created you had done a little slideshow, and then if you want to comment anymore, do you want to say anything about the slideshow and what you put together before I started?
Well, this was something that I did for another group, and I'm not sure what the date was. I think it's just a year ago. Do you know, Christy?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's about a year ago.
I think it's about a year. So,
But
I
it goes into a lot of the Egyptian connection and
well, because the Gospel of Mary was found in Egypt. So I went in to, and the whole story of just the discovery of the Gospel of Mary back in the 1800s was a big deal. But because of all of these circumstances, it never got published, and it definitely never got published in English until Robertson, who did the big book on the discovery of the Nag Hammadi, thought, oh my God, yeah, there was a Gospel of Mary. I don't remember it ever got translated into English. Why don't we get it translated? I'll put it in with this whole compendium. Is that the right word? But this whole big book on the Gnostic Gospels, I'll include the Gospel of Mary. And that's what he did. And that's what gave the Gospel of Mary its first real voice into the modern world.
right. But to me, it didn't really seem like it landed or got much attention until Joseph Rowe's English translation of Leloup's work got published, and that
Well,
was in
it's
2000.
timing. It's timing. You
Yeah,
know, at least it got out there, and then, people have got to know about it. It was a slow process for it to come into public attention. And the Gospel of Thomas got a lot of attention, and the Gospel of Mary maybe is just beginning to get attention. So, these things take time.
yeah. Well, of course, it didn't help that it was a banned book.
Oh, really? Who banned it?
Pardon?
Who banned it?
It was considered to be heretical from the 12th century, from what I understand.
The 12th century? No, it wasn't discovered during the 12th century. It
Mm,
was hidden in the 4th or 5th century,
right.
but not in, I mean, the 12th century, they didn't have it. This is all new.
That's a good point. See, clarification.
Oh, no.
It's interesting because you talk about the discovery in Egypt of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. I am so thrilled. Thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Elizabeth, to talk about how it was for you as you awakened to the Magdalene yourself and take us on your journey.
Well, it was it was extremely intense, and there's so much I could say. It came as a total surprise. It came in 1989, before the spring equinox, and it was a powerful apparition experience where I saw this gorgeous creature moving in spiraling in this sort of opalescent form, and she identified herself as Mary Magdalene. And she said she was calling me to help represent her or represent her into our modern world.
Beautifully said.
So, yeah. And so there was more said, but, that's personal. But it launched me. And within days of that experience, my mother suddenly died. And, when a parent dies, it's a big shock. And so I prepared myself to go back to Syracuse, where I was born. And a dear friend, my dear friend Scott, who you know, Christy, or knew of, who just died, he came with me. And when I took him back to the airport. In the Syracuse airport, I met two Russian Orthodox priests whose father had just died. And so they were on the same plane. Anyways, that launched me into staying at a Russian Orthodox monastery, a very large Russian Orthodox monastery with a tremendous amount of icons that they had smuggled out of Russia. At any rate, it's a
that Orthodox monastery was very devoted to Magdalene, wasn't it?
It wasn't devoted to Magdalene, but I happened to arrive on Russian Orthodox Easter. Oh. So the whole Russian Orthodox Easter, the theme was Mary Magdalene has the apostle to the apostles and the first to preach the gospel. So right. I arrived on that note and with all these red eggs, and the place was, red eggs everywhere. And then I was brought down into a crypt, and there was literally hundreds of red eggs on top of the wow. the different, they had coffins down there, just like you're going to see some coffins this time in my Egyptian cool. presentation. Cool. So there was all these coffins with red eggs, and it was all about exclaiming the risen Christ through Mary Magdalene. So that really switched up because I was raised Catholic. I was educated in Catholic schools, so I was pretty steeped in the storyline, the Catholic storyline. But this brought me into the Russian Orthodox tradition. They had classes set up for me. They really fostered my interest. And so, I mean, I could go on a long time about all of this, but this foundation really did help me later on, because also with the Holy Sophia, because the Sophianic tradition is really well preserved within the Orthodox Christian tradition. So having been given a good background in Russian Orthodoxy, and of course, the Catholic theology, gave me some good foundation to do this work. But at the same time, I was almost overwhelmed by the amount of pressure I felt to take on this material. And I had pretty much escaped out of Catholicism and really entered into the yogic world. I meditated, I did yoga. I was really steeped more in Hinduism. So I was resistant to go back to Catholicism and the Gospels and all of that. But, life insisted that I do it. And I know there's Mona Lisa on the call, so she's very familiar with the Temple of Isis. So I did my first pilgrimage to discover Magdalene. I did my first pilgrimage discovering Mary Magdalene. And when I returned, a friend brought me up to Isis Oasis just in time to meet these ladies from that came from Conical Castle in Ireland and carrying this lineage of Isis and the priesthood of Isis to the Temple of Isis. And they had ordinations. There was 4 days of intense preparation, and then I was ordained. That was in 1990. And then I've gone on to have all these other multiple ordinations, and then having met Rosamond, head of the Mary Magdalene order from France. And because I was already ordained a priestess of Isis, I was ordained sooner than a lot of people who were ordained, because she said all those who are priestesses of Magdalene were originally priestesses of Isis. So it followed this course, and that Mary Magdalene herself was a priestess of Isis. So that really cemented me in my really deep search and commitment to study all this, but to really research and study Egypt, which is a big task. I've been at this, what did I say, 33 years now. And
Yes.
There is so much more to learn. And I had a lot of good fortune being connected to the Temple of Isis. And the founder wrote plays. And even though they were quite, creative expressions, she did get us all studying for these different roles. And I had multiple roles in these plays. So, and it's part of the Icean tradition. See, later on in Egypt during the Ptolemaic time, they did plays and they did act out these parts. And so when you take on a role, you're really going deeper into that divine spirit that you are embodying in these different temple plays. So it was, it was a phenomenal experience. And it has brought me to Egypt 3 times. I've been all through Egypt, from Alexandria to the Sudan, and then across the Arabian desert to the Red Sea. So I so
you guys are in store for a treat
I have
today.
traveled some miles.
Yes.
And I have also been to Magdala. So should I start the presentation? Or,
yeah.
Just to give an overview of the discovery of the Gospel of Mary and where it was discovered and why where it was discovered is important. And then depending upon time, it's not fully complete. I started to go back into ancient Egypt and really talk about the land where the discovery of the Gospel of Mary was, and some of the traditions that went on in Akhman, Egypt. So, but it's a there's some images there. It's not a fully developed presentation. There's only a few of us.
Hey, we're always so happy to do this again or to go deeper. So
it depends. I think we'll do it in phases, and people can ask questions.
Sure.
And then it can be developed upon, because it's a lot to bite into. There's a lot of material here.
Well, why don't we, I'll let you take the show from here, and we can have you take it from here.
So that there was no confusion, Karen King called it the Gospel of Mary of Magdala. And as Christy knows, and she's heard this story many times, I was in Magdala. I was at this wall exactly in that position. And the dear friend, artist Andrew Annenberg, wanted to paint a Magdalene. And he came to me, and we conspired to do this piece of Mary Magdalene on the Sea of Galilee. So I'm using this is to make clear that this is not any other Mary, but Mary Magdalene. And this is Karen King. I know Christy uses Jean Leloup's book, and I used 3 different books to put this presentation together, but Karen King has she's now the professor, and I think she even became dean in the past few years of Harvard Divinity School. Very heady position. And she gives a little summary of the Gospel of Mary, that it presents a radical interpretations of Jesus' teaching as a path to inner spiritual knowledge. It doesn't speak of his suffering and death as a path to eternal life. It presents the most straightforward and convincing argument in any of the early Christian writings for the legitimacy of women's leadership. I mean, Mary Magdalene was the prime teacher of Jesus's teachings. And you'll see in the text how clear that point is made. And it exposes the view that Mary Magdalene was a common prostitute. And it shows that there was an incredible lack of harmony within the early church as opposed to the male disciples and female disciples. And it asks us to rethink the basis of the basis for church authority. Now, that's a really big one because, as we all know, they're really dug in to their positions, and not wanting to ordain women. But once more and more of these teachings come out, and Mary Magdalene is gaining everywhere in acknowledgement and recognition, hopefully it will change. So I started with the very basic. What is a codex? A codex different than the papyrus that was found at Nag Hammadi. It's more of a book. And it was a Roman invention, and it replaced the scrolls as the first book. And that's what was found in Akhman, Egypt. It's called the Berlin Akhman Codex. And there are 4 texts bound together. All are Greek works in Coptic translations, and 71 pages within the whole codex. So there was 4 books in the codex. And so one of them was a Gospel of Mary. The other one was the Apocryphum of John. The third was the Sophia of Jesus Christ, and the Gnosis of Right Thinking of the Blessed. I didn't quite say that right, but let's just say Right Thinking of the Blessed, because I'm not pronouncing that word correctly. And only recently, and the summary of the Acts of Peter. So that's a lot of material in there. And I have taken on in college classes the Apocryphum of John, which is kind of like a very strong foundation for Gnosticism. But this other one, the Sophia of Jesus Christ, is so incredibly deep. And just the other day, wow, I was with Cara Luna, and we were getting ready to create something for Easter, and we're using the Thunder Perfect Mind. But in the Nag Hammadi book, library book that I have, we started onto the Sophia of Jesus Christ, and it is so deep and so profound. I really look forward to going deeper and taking that on. But right now, we're in the Gospel of Mary. But I wanted you to know that, how this was bound and what is, because sometimes you will see it said as the Akhman Codex. And Berlin is because it was brought to Berlin. So the gospel is 19 pages, and a certain amount are missing. I can't even see the text itself. Oh, I can't do that.
I can read it.
Yeah, if you want to read it, Chris.
I'm just reading it. But it was found in Akhman, Egypt, and purchased in Cairo in 1896, then brought to Berlin. In 1912, it was about to be published when the entire edition was destroyed by water and World War I began. And the next bullet point is 1944. The project was revived. It was ready for publication in 1943, but was unable to go to press because of World War II. A full translation of
all
the
these
gospel.
frustrations, yeah.
Yeah, a full translation of the gospel was not published until 1955. The English translation was published in 1978 within the Nag Hammadi Library. The first commentaries in English were published in 2002 and 2003.
So that was quite a long saga of it getting it first translated. It was a person named Dr. Karl Reinhardt who picked it up in Cairo and then brought it to Berlin, and there it sat on a shelf. I mean, who knows what else is sitting on shelves in these different libraries, but he had to go through 2 world wars. And then when it finally did get published in 1955, it never really got released. Well, it was never published in English. It was done first in German, and then in 1977, or whatever that says, it was an afterthought by Robertson, who published the Nag Hammadi, to put this in. So it had a lot of gaps along the way. And it's just only now that with Karen King and La Loupe and these translations that have come out, and for us to take on a study group like this to really look at it, this is like really the first opportunity now we've had to really study and work and discuss this text. So it's quite a significant moment in time. So I put this on the map very large so you could see Akhman, Egypt. And it's not far from Nag Hammadi, and it's only on the other side of the Nile River from Abydos. And Abydos was the center of the Osirian cult. It is where Osiris had his resurrection. So it's a very, very deep and potent place, and it has a huge, very long history within the Egyptian tradition. So as you can see, it's only across the river from Akhman. And so it's steeped in this ancient Egyptian traditional area of those who really deeply believed in the process of death and resurrection, first from the Egyptian tradition and then from the Christian tradition. And I guess this is another map to show you the proximity from Abydos to Akhman, and it's not that far from Dendera, which is dedicated to the goddess Hathor. And it's a very profound and amazing temple, Dendera. But this codex was found wrapped in feathers in a niche in a wall in a Christian burial site. And then, as I already said, purchased by Karl Reinhardt and brought to Berlin. But I feel, and this is an example of Egyptian catacombs. Now, it most likely, it may or may not have been the same catacomb that this was found in, but I thought it was an interesting representative of the Christian catacombs, and how it being wrapped in feathers really, to me, because I'm steeped in this Egyptian tradition, that the goddess Mot always her symbol was a feather, because it was believed that our hearts had to be as light as a feather, for when we passed, the god Anubis, the god of the underworld, would weigh your heart against the feather of Ma'at. And if your feather, and if your heart weighed as light as a feather, you could, pass into the higher realms. If not, you were eaten by a crocodile, and so you didn't want that. And so when I was in Egypt, I just want to say something about the rewriting of the 42 ideals of Mot, which I know you know a lot about. So when I was in Egypt with Lorian, who had started this temple that we are all a part of, we, on this journey, rewrote the principles of Mot, and so that when we pass into the other world, our hearts will be as light as a feather. And so this is a much larger version of that. Christy, do you want to read it?
Sure. The scale of judgment has the deceased heart on the left side in a jar, and the feather of justice, Ma'at, on the right side. The Egyptians believed that the heart, not the brain, was the source of one's personality and identity. The goddess Ma'at is on top of the middle of the scale, supervising the proceedings. She has the feather of justice on her head. Thoth, the god of writing, a personified ibis, is that how you say it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The bird, ibis.
Ibis takes down the judgment. If the deceased passes judgment, he will continue to the underworld. Otherwise, he will be eaten by the devourer, who is part lion, part alligator, and sits under the right hand arm of the scale.
Yeah, so if you don't pass the test, you get gobbled up.
It's good to have your heart as light as a feather, right?
Yeah. So, and there's these 42, they were called laws, but you'll see in the Gospel of Mary, Jesus said to his disciples, don't create laws or you will be bound to those laws and you will regret it. So we recreated these as ideals of Mot. And so it was a lovely project while cruising the Nile. We spent an entire month there rewriting writing these ideals of Mot.
I just want to comment that before you go on, because Heather Salmon put the 42 ideals of Mot into a beautiful dance and musical expression. And so I will find out from her. Maybe I can add it into the replay so that people can see it.
Oh yeah,
played out.
That would be nice.
That would be a beautiful addition to this. So we'll see. It may be a surprise gift when you get the replay.
Mm-hmm. And I have put together a slideshow of our travels, and I was to do I was to do a webinar with Heather when my computer crashed and I lost it all. So, but anyways, that's just a sidebar. But this is very interesting. This is a burial chamber used from the 2nd to the 4th century AD, and this is Christian also. So for those who think that Christianity kind of, created their own unique religion or came in a void, it's not true. In Egypt, it was so embedded in the Egyptian tradition, even though this is a later period. This is the 2nd to 4th century. This is a couple hundred years after the death of Jesus, but it still was using the same motifs. There you see Anubis, and you can see Thoth, and some of the same principles of that weighing of the heart is still enacted way into the 4th century of the Christian era. And so in looking at these burial sites, and that the Gospel of Mary was found in a burial site wrapped in feathers, it really clicked in my psyche to look more deeply into how the Christians were burying at that time. And so I came up with these gorgeous portraits. These were paintings that were put on top of their coffins. And this is a lovely picture of a young Roman girl wearing a wreath from about 350 AD. These are Christian burial sites, but it's mixed with the Egyptian and the Roman and the Greek. It was really quite a conglomerate of different peoples and cultures and traditions. But I thought she was beautiful. This is a very startling portrait of a young man who looks like, any one of the, younger men that we see today from a Middle Eastern descent. And these are 2 women from the 2nd century. And I did get into this because I felt these were our ancestors. If they were Christian, if they were Gnostic, I don't know that, but they were the very early pioneers of Christianity that was putting this new revelation and trying to absorb this new revelation. So I really appreciated seeing these pictures. And this is the one on the left is, off a coffin, and the one on the right, they cleaned up, and it just, it looks like a young girl that could be living today. So I did have a strong feeling of like a long, deep ancestral root. And these could be, I don't know for sure, they could have been using the Gospel of Mary. They could have known about it. They could have been reading it. And this is a picture of a woman with an ankh, which later became the first cross. The one next to that is the first Christian cross. So you see, this combination with the ankh, the breath of life, all that we can breathe in, and our source of being and the flow of prana, and how it got incorporated. And it was not the cross that we're used to, or as some say, the instrument of torture that Jesus died on as a symbol, but it was a symbol of the breath of life. And it's so much more empowering as the first cross. And just another picture. I was going to put more writing in there, but didn't get to it. But we're going to start talking about the Gnostics. So, Christy, can you read this?
Yes, the gnosis sorry, is revealed knowledge or inner wisdom that streams from within the individual. Gnosis is said to be knowledge of the heart, a path of inner spiritual knowledge.
So again, it goes back to the heart. How do you feel in your heart? Is this the right path for you? Is this the right trajectory of what you should be doing? It has to resonate deeply in your heart. And this is a picture of a mid-4th century monastery, not just across the river from Aachen, which was a large Christian center. So there's this white monastery, and there's also a red monastery, and then there's another monastery in Aachen that's just being excavated by Yale Divinity School. And here, I wonder, this is the one that's under excavation, and it's a site currently that is that they're working on right now. But this is a long-range site of what it looks like, what the land looks like. And these Christians, during the Roman period, it was quite debauched. The Ptolemaic Greek rulers really kept the structure of the Egyptian religion much more. The Romans really got very much into debauchery. And so a lot of sincere people left and went into the hills and created monasteries, and definitely the Gnostics did also. And that's how they were able to go deep into their awakening of the inner gnosis inside. They would put themselves out in these very remote areas of the desert. And so I put this in because I did walk that land, and it's very harsh. I made 3, maybe 4 pilgrimages altogether to Christian monasteries that were in very remote areas. 1, I took a camel, and 2, I walked. But it was very harsh land, very remote, very hard on your shoes. They kind of eat up your shoes. But you can see how extreme and remote the land is where these people lived. But and they did it also to go into very deep contemplation of these texts. So who wrote the Gospel of Mary? Early Christian Gnostics, followers of Mary Magdalene, written in the early 2nd century. There's another segment that is not quite finished, but let us stop here.
Thank you so much. Blessings to you. All righty.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Blessings to you. Love it.
I think we'll call it a day here. Well, I'm happy to see that that Magdalene has been rising. She's got a stronger presence. More and more people are hearing about her, are involved in mystery schools and getting trained, and involved in classes and things like that. Feast days, we had more people doing the Magdalene feast day than ever in the past. So, and how about your own personal connection with Magdalene and what you feel for the future she holds that you want to say just as a closing?
Well, because we were going to talk about, or we have talked about the Gospel of Mary, there's a whole segment in there about becoming fully human. So I think that's a very profound question for all of us to answer. What does it mean now? Here we are in 2023, just about to move into 2024. We've got a lot of problems on the planet. And yet my personal life is pretty wonderful. And so in asking the question, what does it mean to become fully human? I think about that. It's a different calling now, depending upon where we live. Maybe if I was living in the Holy Land right now, oh my God, that would be very stressful. Well, I'm living, I mean, I've got challenges, no doubt, but I'm living a fairly stress-filled life. Nobody's trying to kill me, there's no bombing over my head. And so becoming fully human for me is different than, depending upon where you live in this, on our planet. So I've been thinking about that and the challenge of the Gospel of Mary and certain statements that are, put out, how we would answer that in our own individual lives. And has the Gospel of Mary is in some of the other Gnostic texts, it's always about going within. And there's not doctrine. Nobody's telling you what to believe. Nobody's telling you what you should be doing. It's what your inner soul, what your inner voice, what your soul is telling you, what it means. And so I think that's different for each individual. And I think that would be a very interesting inquiry. What does it mean for each individual to become fully human?
Yeah, and I would even add a caveat to that, because the fully human is the integrated self of both divine and human, so that we are as above, so below, as within and without. There's an understanding of wholeness, and when we become whole, we become wholehearted, then we're full of compassion. We're operating from love. Our center point, our compass is the heart, and living a heartfelt path and expressing love. And so miracles happen. We become miracle minded, and we can overcome obstacles and all of that. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me. So thank you so much. I'm in the cathedral with the blue rose window on the side. But it's all about being, can you imagine these people built these temples and these cathedrals that they really understood what it meant to be the sacred self. And I think we have lost touch with that from our world. It's losing touch with the sacred, and that's why wars are going on, because we don't have sovereign, empowered women. Well, this is the first of the series, so that's to put the thought in, and to be thinking about this is where we go with that. So anyway, thank you so much.
All right.
I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.